I hadn't meant to linger. But the instant she walked into the room, everything slowed, like someone had pressed pause on the rest of the world, leaving only her and me. She was standing by the window, the late afternoon sunlight catching strands of her hair, softening the lines around her eyes in a way that made her look at once older and younger, familiar and impossible to grasp. "I should leave before it gets complicated," she said, and her voice, low, almost reluctant, made my chest tighten. "Too late," I replied before thinking, my words catching somewhere between audacity and disbelief. She blinked at me, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips, the kind that hides laughter and warning all at once. She turned slowly, her movement measured, as if she knew I was watching, as if she wanted me to notice everything, the way her fingers brushed the edge of the curtain, the subtle tilt of her head, the faint scent of jasmine that lingered when she breathed. I felt it before I realized I was holding my own breath. Her eyes found mine. They were a storm of confidence tempered by a shadow of something softer, regret, maybe, or memory. Whatever it was, it made me lean closer, without meaning to. I wasn't supposed to feel this drawn, not to someone who seemed untouchable, who carried her own history like a quiet flame. "Do you come here often?" I asked, stupidly casual. My voice felt small in the space between us, like it didn't belong to me. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took a slow step closer, her hand brushing mine lightly, almost accidentally, but enough to send an electric pulse up my arm. My fingers twitched. I wanted to hold her hand, to anchor myself there, but I didn't. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner and the distant noise of traffic outside. Every tick of the clock seemed louder than it should. I noticed the soft sway of her dress, the way it caught the light, the subtle perfume of her skin mingling with the vanilla candle burning on the table. My stomach tightened. I was aware of her nearness, so aware it was almost painful. "I didn't expect to see you," she said finally, her voice steadier than her body suggested. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, brushing my fingers again in the process, as if testing the space between us. "I never expect to see you," I admitted. There was no irony in it. I couldn't lie, not with her. Her eyes flicked to the door, then back to me, a subtle warning. I could see it in the half-smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, the way her hand hovered near mine but didn't fully close the gap. And yet, the tension, the hesitation, the electricity between us, it was all invitation. Or maybe it was just me reading too much. The air between us seemed to hold its breath. I noticed the soft brush of her perfume again, the warmth radiating from her, the way the sunlight caught her eyes in fleeting flashes. I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice failed me. Then, just as the quiet became unbearable, the sharp creak of a door opening down the hall broke the moment. She froze. I froze. And in that sudden intrusion, our eyes met again, holding, questioning, almost daring. She whispered, almost to herself, "Maybe it already is too late." I wanted to say yes. But the words got caught somewhere in my throat as the space between us stretched, electric and unfinished. The next few days were a quiet torment. I kept finding excuses to be near her, even if near meant standing awkwardly at the kitchen counter while she stirred her tea, pretending to check a text. She moved through her apartment with that effortless grace, and I noticed the little things, the way her fingers lingered on the rim of her mug, the faint tremor in her wrist when she poured herself more coffee than usual. I remembered now what she had told me once, in passing, that she'd been burned before. That she learned, the hard way, that closeness comes with a price. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. The thought made me ache, not just for her, but for the way people could leave marks on each other, invisible but permanent. I tried to ignore the intensity of noticing her, the way my chest tightened whenever she leaned forward to explain something, her hand brushing mine accidentally as she passed. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that I didn't care what the world might think, but the words wouldn't come. The age gap alone felt like a wall I wasn't supposed to climb, though my mind and body insisted otherwise. She seemed aware of it too. There were moments when she lingered too close, her shoulder grazing mine just long enough for me to catch the warmth, her breath brushing my ear while she read something aloud. I could feel the subtle hesitation in her own movements, a careful balancing act between curiosity and caution. One evening, she laughed softly at something I said, a laugh that trembled at the edges, half amusement, half uncertainty. Her eyes held mine a fraction too long, and my fingers itched to brush against hers, to trace the line of her jaw without permission. But I stayed frozen, holding back, even though every nerve in my body begged me to reach for her. I remembered the night she said she spent alone in this apartment, reading old letters, nursing regrets she didn't voice aloud. And I realized how carefully she guarded herself, how much she feared losing control, and yet, in small ways, she let me in. That night, as she handed me a mug of tea, our fingers brushed again. Neither of us moved away, though both of us seemed aware of how dangerously close we were. I felt a surge of something I couldn't name, need, perhaps, or longing, and she tilted her head slightly, lips parted, eyes soft but conflicted. We stood like that for a long moment, unspoken electricity threading between us. I noticed the warmth radiating from her body, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the tea steam, the way her gaze lingered in that impossible in-between of curiosity and restraint. Finally, she let out a breath, almost a sigh, and stepped back, but her hand remained near mine for a heartbeat longer than necessary. That small, silent acknowledgement said everything words couldn't. And for the first time, I felt it, the quiet promise of something forbidden, fragile, and wholly ours hovering in the space between us, waiting for the first spark to ignite. I thought I was alone when she leaned over the counter, showing me the faint crease in the fabric she was repairing. Her shoulder brushed mine, lightly at first, then more insistently, as if testing my reaction. My chest tightened, and I had to remind myself to breathe. "You've got something here," I said, voice low, almost a whisper. Her eyes flicked to mine. That soft, unreadable look she gave me made my stomach twist. "Do I?" she asked, lips curved, teasing but uncertain. Her hand hovered near mine, just inches away, and I wanted nothing more than to close that gap. The moment stretched. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic, the soft clink of her spoon against the mug, all of it disappeared except for the charge in the air between us. I could feel her warmth radiating through her sweater, the way her perfume lingered in the space where we were standing, teasing and intimate. A sudden click at the door made both of us freeze. I turned my head slightly, her roommate, maybe, or the mailman, but it was just the wind rattling the old lock. Relief and embarrassment flared through me. She gave a faint laugh, brushing her hand over mine again, almost an apology, almost a dare. I swallowed hard. "We shouldn't," my voice faltered. I didn't want to speak the words. She tilted her head, her lips brushing closer to where I stood. "Shouldn't what?" she murmured, almost teasing, almost fragile. Her breath was warm, faintly scented with jasmine and something indefinable that made my heart stutter. I don't know," I admitted, running a hand through my hair. My fingers itched to reach for her, to close the space, but I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. Her hand drifted along the edge of the counter until it touched mine. Our fingers lingered, barely brushing, but the electricity in that touch made my vision blur. I felt the tiny tremor of her hand, the unspoken hesitation that mirrored my own. We stayed like that, frozen, glances darting and hearts hammering. Her lips parted slightly, a breathless, tentative invitation, and I leaned closer, too close, too aware of every line of her face, every flicker of emotion in her eyes. Then the ping of a phone on the table shattered the moment. She jumped slightly, pulled her hand back, and I cursed the interruption under my breath. The sound felt like a reprimand, like a reminder that the world outside this apartment would never approve, that our closeness carried a risk we hadn't fully measured. But when I looked up, her gaze caught mine again, lingering longer than necessary. Something in her stance, in the tilt of her shoulder, the faint quiver of her breath, pulled me closer despite the warnings in my head. I stepped forward almost without realizing, and she didn't step back. We were inches apart, heartbeats echoing like drums in the quiet room. Her hand hovered near mine again, trembling faintly, and I could feel the impossible tension, desire and fear tangled so tightly it almost hurt. And in that moment, despite the interruption, despite the hesitation, despite everything we told ourselves we couldn't do, I felt her pull me closer anyway. I couldn't stand it anymore. Watching her move around the room, laughing softly at something that wasn't funny to anyone else, feeling the warmth of her presence so close yet untouchable, it was like holding fire in my hands, knowing I might get burned. She caught me staring, and for a moment, the playful mask fell. Her eyes darkened, a shadow of something raw, frustration? Longing, and my stomach tightened. I wanted to tell her, to confess the impossible pull I felt toward her, but the words tangled in my throat. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. She leaned forward just slightly, enough for her shoulder to brush mine, enough for the heat of her body to make my head spin. I can't help it," I said, my voice low, tremulous. My hand twitched at my side, and I caught myself imagining sliding it along the curve of her waist, brushing her hair from her face, feeling the warmth of her cheek under my fingers. She didn't move away. Instead, her gaze softened, and there it was, the quiet pull of someone who knew the risk but couldn't resist. My chest tightened as she leaned just a fraction closer, and I felt her breath on my skin, faintly scented with vanilla and something older, deeper, something that made my pulse spike. "I shouldn't," she murmured, almost to herself. Her words were a warning and an invitation all at once. I wanted to argue, to tell her it didn't matter, that the world outside these walls didn't exist right now, but I stayed frozen, caught between wanting to step forward and fearing the consequences of doing so. Our eyes locked, and in that gaze, I saw all the things we weren't saying, the loneliness, the longing, the small regrets that had brought us here. Every hesitation, every restraint, every secret desire hung in the air, pressing against us like the weight of the room itself. I took a step closer, almost unconsciously. Her hand rose slightly, brushing the back of my neck, fingers trembling just enough for me to notice. My own hand lifted, hovering near her arm, and the electricity of that near touch sent shivers down my spine. "I can't," she whispered, voice breaking, and I felt it, the quiet surrender of someone trying to resist something she wanted far too much. "I know," I said, almost breathless, my lips dangerously close to her ear. My voice was low, a trembling promise that I couldn't take back. The warmth of her skin so near made the world outside disappear. We stood like that, suspended in a single moment, hearts racing, every instinct screaming to bridge the final inches between us. The air between us shimmered with tension, thick enough to taste, heavy with all the words we couldn't speak and all the actions we hadn't dared take. And then she tilted her head, just a fraction, and our lips were nearly touching. My fingers itched to brush her hair back, to close the gap completely, to do the one thing that would make everything irrevocable. But before that could happen, the sharp click of the door opening echoed through the apartment. Her eyes widened. My chest sank. And in that suspended, breathless moment, everything hung on the edge, between surrender and restraint, desire and fear, almost and forever. I hadn't expected anyone to knock. And yet, just as I was leaning closer, just as the tension between us had become almost unbearable, there was a sharp rap at the door. She froze, fingers lingering near mine, and I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. It's just a neighbor," she said quickly, though her voice didn't carry the usual ease. Her hand brushed against mine as she stepped toward the door, just slightly too close, and the warmth of her body pressed against me for a heartbeat longer than necessary. My fingers twitched where they met hers. But it wasn't the neighbor. A note, slipped beneath the door as she opened it a crack, revealed a name I hadn't expected to see. Someone she'd known, someone from her past who had always hovered at the edges of her life. And in that instant, the safe world I thought we shared shifted. I noticed how her hand trembled, how her jaw tightened, the faint crease in her brow. She read the note quickly, eyes darting between the paper and me, and I felt a strange ache watching her reaction, desire and fear tangled together, impossible to separate. "I didn't tell you everything," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. She stepped back, hands brushing against her own arms as if to anchor herself, though her body was still aware of mine, aware of the nearness we'd built in stolen moments. What do you mean?" I asked, voice low, almost pleading, though I hated the desperation it carried. She hesitated. Her gaze dropped, then flicked up, meeting mine again with a sharp intensity. "I've been afraid," she said, "that if anyone knew, they'd think I was reckless. That I wanted this too much." The words landed like fire on my skin. My hand itched to reach for her, to reassure her, to close the tiny space between us, but I paused. Her own body told me the truth, the warmth in her chest, the soft hitch in her breath, the way her shoulder lingered near mine, too close to be casual. I stepped slightly closer, unconsciously, and she didn't pull away. The note fluttered to the floor, forgotten, and our eyes held, each heartbeat loud in the quiet room. Her hair brushed against my cheek as she leaned forward slightly, almost instinctively, almost like she wanted me to take the risk. And you, she asked, voice trembling now, softer than before. Do you want this? I swallowed hard, aware of how close we were, the faint scent of her perfume mixing with the tension in the air. My fingers hovered near hers, nearly touching, the tiny sparks of electricity in that near contact almost unbearable. I do, I admitted, the words raw, unpolished, unfiltered. And in saying it, the world outside, the judgments, the age difference, the risks seemed to vanish for a moment, leaving just the two of us suspended on the edge of something we both knew we shouldn't, but couldn't resist. Her lips parted slightly, eyes searching mine, and I felt the impossible pull between us, fear, desire, and longing all coiled together in a single, tense heartbeat. We stood like that, inches apart, aware that whatever happened next would change everything. And for the first time, the choice wasn't about holding back. It was about stepping forward or letting it slip away forever. The room seemed to shrink around us. Every sound, our breathing, the faint hum of the heater, the distant traffic, was magnified, yet irrelevant. She was just inches away, and I could see every nuance in her face, the tremor of her lips, the subtle shine of moisture in her eyes, the way her chest rose and fell with shallow, rapid breaths. I don't know if we should, she whispered, her hand hovering near mine, almost touching, almost retreating. Her voice carried the weight of hesitation, of fear, of longing she couldn't fully name. I reached slowly, deliberately, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She shivered, and the movement made the decision for me. My fingers lingered at her cheek, tracing the line of her jaw, feeling the warmth of her skin beneath the soft cotton of her sweater. You're here, I said, voice low, almost shaking, and I don't want to let this go. Her eyes searched mine, as though asking permission, as though testing whether I could bear the consequences. I felt the tension coiled between us, electric and dangerous, and I knew the moment for restraint had passed. She inhaled sharply, leaning into my hand without moving closer. The faint scent of her perfume mixed with the warmth radiating from her body, creating a gravity I couldn't resist. Every instinct told me to close the remaining space, to bridge the gap that had tormented us for days, but I paused, savoring the weight of anticipation. I've wanted this, she admitted, voice barely audible, trembling, more than I should. The confession hung in the air, brittle and fragile. I swallowed hard, fingers brushing her arm, our bodies so near that the smallest shift sent sparks of tension through both of us. Me too, I breathed. Every day. The hesitation dissolved, replaced by the inevitability we had both been dancing around. I stepped closer, feeling her presence like a pulse against my own. She tilted her head, eyes softening, lips parting just slightly enough to make every heartbeat thrum faster, to make the world narrow down to the space between us. For a long, suspended moment, we simply existed there, two flawed, human beings, drawn together by desire and fear, longing and regret, and a connection neither of us could ignore. Then she closed the last fraction of the distance herself. My hand rested at the small of her back, hers lingered on my chest, almost testing, almost claiming. Our foreheads touched, breaths mingling, and I could feel her heartbeat sync with mine. I don't care about the rest, I whispered, voice rough. Only this. She smiled softly, almost a sigh, and the tension in her shoulders melted. Then, neither do I. It was messy, tentative, perfect in its imperfection. We didn't need words beyond the ones we had spoken. In that quiet surrender, in that careful closeness, we understood each other fully, our fears, our desire, our history, and the fragile promise of what could come next. The moment wasn't flawless, it was human, raw, and irrevocable. But it was ours. The evening light had softened into something warm and forgiving, spilling through the windows and painting the room in gold. We sat together on the couch, knees brushing, hands tangled in a slow, comfortable intertwine. Neither of us spoke at first, words seemed unnecessary after all the tension, all the confessions, all the small battles we'd fought against desire and doubt. Her head rested lightly on my shoulder, and I could feel the faint rise and fall of her chest against mine. It wasn't perfect, our movements were awkward in the most human way, but it was ours. Every brush of her fingers, every tilt of her head, was a quiet conversation, a reassurance that neither time nor judgment could erase the connection we had discovered. I never thought it could feel like this, she murmured softly, eyes closed, voice threaded with something like relief. Neither did I admitted, leaning my head toward hers, letting our foreheads meet. The warmth of her skin, the the softness of her breath, made the moment electric yet tender. I felt the steady rhythm of her heartbeat beneath my palm and realized that for once, hesitation didn't matter. We laughed quietly, awkwardly, at the memory of all the near misses and almost moments that had brought us here. Her hand brushed my cheek, tentative, testing, and I tilted my head into her palm. The contact was gentle, deliberate, and full of meaning, an acknowledgement of our past, and a promise for the future. "I was so afraid of everything," she whispered, voice breaking in the most human way. "Of what people might think. Of what I might feel. Of losing control. And yet here we are," I said, heart thudding, tracing the outline of her hand with my thumb. "Still afraid. Still, exactly where we should be." She smiled, soft and genuine, and leaned fully into me. My arm wrapped around her, pulling her closer, grounding myself. It was simple. It was messy. It was human. And it was perfect because it was real. We stayed like that for a long time, letting the quiet fill the space. Outside, the world went on with its judgments and its noise, but inside, in that sunlit room, there was only us, two people who had danced around impossibility, who had stumbled over fear, who had finally let the undeniable pull guide them together. Eventually, she lifted her head slightly, resting her forehead against mine, lips almost brushing in a tender, teasing hover. I closed my eyes, savoring the closeness, the warmth, the proof that hesitation could be survived, that desire could be met with patience, and that age, distance, or doubt didn't define what we felt. "Together," she whispered, almost a vow. "Together," I echoed, knowing that yes, finally, we were. And in that quiet, golden light, tangled hands and steady heartbeats, it felt like nothing else in the world mattered. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?